Hey Noah, I've got a question for you. Have you heard about what's going on with Kanye? How can these companies just drop their contracts with him?
So yeah, I have heard about what's been going on with Ye. Pretty hard to avoid. Basically, there are a few different categories of contracts that Ye's had canceled and relationships that have sort of ended of his. And there's different ways that happens depending on the contract. Main one that has ended for him is Adidas just canceled their contract with him on Tuesday. And that's like seriously costly. They're saying it's going to cost them 250 million euros this year, and it might be worth 100 million annually to Ye. So that's like big money there. Gap, Ye had already terminated that agreement somehow back in September. And continuing on the sort of fashion relationships, you got Balenciaga, where he was collaborating with them on Gap and had like a broader sort of customer relationship with them, like spending millions of dollars a year on their clothing. That one seemed to be more of an informal partnership, but it's hard to tell. Vogue used to do a lot of informal collaboration with them, but that's kind of gone. But that's probably not governed by a contract. So all these ones, like especially the Adidas one and the Gap one, contracts generally have terms in them that talk about how you terminate the contracts, because like terminating, like ending them can be important in different situations. Some contracts have what's called a termination for convenience clause in them. And like the kind of clause says, it just means like if you feel like it, the contract has a termination for convenience clause in it, you can just terminate the contract. And there may be some penalties or not, or things that have to happen, or like notice periods or anything like that. But if you have a termination for convenience clause, you can just terminate the contract and it's pretty easy. In other contracts, like what I would expect, the Adidas one, probably given that it's like hundreds of millions of dollars a year of value between the different parties, I suspect it probably had a tighter termination clause in it. And in there, you might be terminating for cause. Like it's pretty often for someone to have a contract with a celebrity like Kanye, or like if we think back to what happened with Tiger Woods or lots of other examples of celebrity endorsers who did behavior that the brands were kind of uncomfortable with. What you'll see pretty often in those types of contracts is behavior type rules and an ability for the brand to terminate the contract in case of certain behavior. So those types of clauses, again, happen in things where entertainers exist. And I think you'd also probably see them in things like actor contracts and the like, where people can get knocked out and the contract can get canceled in cases of certain behavior. And finally, another choice for a brand is like, you can just terminate a contract sometimes. Like you could breach the contract, terminate it, Ye or whoever could sue, right, for termination. But for some brands, and like given what's going on with Ye right now, that might be the right choice for them. So like you can always just terminate a contract, and sometimes contract will set out the penalties for terminating them, and that works. So like an example of that is what's going on with Elon, and one way that he was trying to initially break his deal with Twitter was like he could just walk away for $1 billion, which seems like a lot of money, but like in the context of the purchase price there was actually not that much, right? So there's times that you can do that. In fact, there were some specific reasons why Elon couldn't just do that in the Twitter deal, but those types of things are pretty common. So I think that's what you're seeing with the Adidas one. On the other hand, like contrast that with Skims, which is the Kim Kardashian's sort of shapewear brand, and that Kanye apparently helped sort of set up its design and aesthetic. And you see that they're not talking about how they've terminated him, but just say that he's a small minority shareholder with no active role at Skims. And part of that, the reason they may not have terminated him may just be due to the relationship dynamic between him and Kim Kardashian and, you know, others in that orbit. But part of it is that like shareholders are pretty hard to get rid of, right? And there, as opposed to kind of like, you know, a brand celebrity type relationship, you can't necessarily get rid of shareholders super easily. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but not always as simple. And so you see that around. Second sort of category relationships that's impacted for Yay is professional service firms. So, for example, the Creative Artists Agency, which is sort of a leading talent management agency, and him have terminated their relationship. Again, probably one of those same sort of things. Under a professional services firm, relationship is probably going to have something like a termination for convenience going either way, where like he could walk away from using CAA as his agents and they could walk away from representing him. And that's probably what happened. Same thing with when you see like Aaron Donald and Jaylen Brown leaving Ye's Donda Sports. Same sort of thing that might happen with Creative Agency. Like they would probably have a clause that enabled them to terminate for convenience. And similarly, Donda could terminate working with them under those same sort of things. And that's going to be allowed. There's a film and television studio called MRC that had a documentary on him that they shelved. I think it would depend under the specific contract, but there's probably a lot of conditions under which they could not release the documentary, which is, it sounds like, what's happening. Then you got kind of some customer accounts of his, like spots where he is a customer. Biggest one of those and sort of most impactful one is JP Morgan. Looks to have terminated his banking relationship there. Possibly, I think he went on and said that he did it, but there's definitely a letter posted by Candace Owens that looks pretty official from JP Morgan saying, as discussed, you should find somewhere else to bank by later in November. That's like something that definitely all of our bank accounts are going to have things like that allow the bank to terminate us for convenience, and similarly for us to kind of walk away from the bank. Like you don't feel like being your bank's customer, you can pull your money out of your bank account there, put it somewhere else, and they probably can't do much to stop you. If you had like a GIC or something, you wouldn't necessarily be able to pull that right out. But generally, like a bank customer contract is going to say that you can do that. And that's probably what happened with JP Morgan. That one is going to be like pretty painful for his team to sort of fix. Like if you are a person making like hundreds of millions of dollars a year and you've got money coming in, like it really does need to go somewhere, and it's non-trivial to sort of set up new banking quickly. So that one shouldn't be too much fun, but under the contract it'd be pretty easy. He's been restricted from his accounts at Twitter and Instagram. Terms of service of those places give them some pretty broad latitude as to suspending people, terminating people for breaching terms of service. I think you say sort of racist and anti-Semitic things on those platforms, and it's going to trigger those terms of service without too much trouble. On the other hand, you see that his deal to buy Parler still looks good to go. So, merger agreements are harder to terminate, though I think Parler probably is pretty happy to sell out to him either way, and I doubt is looking to terminate that. But as Elon Musk and Twitter are showing, it's not necessarily that easy to get away from a merger agreement, just in the same way that it's not that easy to get out of shareholder relationships. And that's what we may be seeing with Skims. So generally, commercial contracts have a way to terminate them, and we're seeing people use those ways. In some cases, it's going to be costly, like certainly in the Adidas case, it is costly for them just in terms of lost revenue, but there may be contractual like termination bits in it. And I think that's just how it is. That all makes sense?
Makes sense to me.
Right on, dude.
Nice.